Hi, and welcome to the first ever episode of Unsafe Space. My name is Amir Pos. You can find me on Twitter at AmirPos_. Um, this will be the first of hopefully many videos and interviews coming up on this channel where we'll discuss topics such as religion, in particular Islam, but also all the various monotheisms and atheism as well. And we'll also discuss political issues as well. My first guest today is probably the best guest I could have hoped for. It's a very phenomenal theologian and scholar in these subjects, but I will also blow away any conceptions of impartiality because he's also my best friend and my younger brother, and his name is Omid. Omid, how are you?
How are you, Amir? Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, and thank you very much for your time. I've already exposed the fact that you're my brother, so we're not gonna. We do still have a lot of differences in fact that I'm an atheist and you're a Christian fundamentalist. But that's what we're gonna. But that's not what we're gonna discuss today. Today we're gonna discuss a topic on which you are really an expert, namely Islam, and we're going to discuss it from a both personal perspective as well as a sort of theological and historical perspective, because my understanding through our relationship is that you were once a Muslim, but you left the religion and now you are a devout fundamentalist Christian. What was that journey like, and why did you leave Islam?
Well, you wanted me to take it from the beginning?
Yes, with the genesis of your journey.
All right, thanks. Well, I can say that during a 1.5 year period in my life, I went every week, sometimes twice a week, to the mosque with my mother, who was a Quran teacher. And I read the Quran every single night, not in Arabic though. I had a Quran in the Swedish language. So you could say it wasn't a real Quran, but instead a explanation of the meaning of the Quran. Never mind. I read it every night and I prayed earnestly to God in Arabic, "Ehdina sirat al-mustaqim," guide me to the straight path. Now, the Quran wasn't the easiest book to understand. In fact, Muslims themselves admit that without the azab al-nuzul, that is the circumstances behind the revelations found in the Quran, nobody can understand the Quran. But there are certain things that are clear in the Quran. There is only one God, and He will judge you on Judgment Day. Those with Iman, that is faith, and good deeds are given the paradise to enjoy, and those who do not submit to God are thrown into the hellfire. These are some of the truths that you can't possibly miss them when you read the Quran. Now the first thing that caused doubt within me was the fact that the specific Islamic belief of my mosque didn't correctly represent the Islam found in the Quran. You see, I was part of a Shia mosque and was told that Shia Islam was the correct form of Islam, but the Quran clearly said otherwise. And if you don't mind, I can explain how I came to the realization that Shia Islam is not true Islam, since it was a major factor that caused me to leave Islam altogether. Is that fine with you?
Yeah, absolutely. But before you do that, just for our viewers, if we have any, but for our viewers, obviously most people know that there are various sects within Islam, the two most prominent ones being the Shia, where the dominant people are in Iran and Syria, and then there's obviously the Sunni, that is the most widespread one across the world. So just if you could give a very brief description of what the Shias believe and what the Sunnis believe, and what is the distinction between the two, because both of them accept Muhammad as the prophet, but it's the heir to Muhammad, if I understand correctly, that is the question.
Definitely, definitely. Shias claim that Ali ibn Abu Talib should have been the successor of the Prophet, he and him alone, while the Muslims accept what actually happened in history, where Abu Bakr came
The
to be the
Sunnis.
successor of Muhammad. I'm sorry?
The Sunnis, you mean?
Yeah, the Sunnis. The Sunnis. I'm sorry. But there are major other differences regarding beliefs and practices. For example, Shia Muslims only pray 3 times a day, and they don't accept many of the authoritative scriptures of the Sunnis, like, for example, Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslims, which are hadith collections. The Shias don't accept all the hadiths found in these collections, because many of these hadiths were written by Sunnis, and many of these Sunnis are regarded by Shias to be kafirs. Hence, they don't actually accept them. But let me describe it this way. Let me try to integrate this into my own journey, because as I said, the Quran is absolutely clear that there is only one God, and only God should be worshipped. That is what is called within Islamic theology for Tawhid al-Uluhiyah. Yet as a Shia Muslim, we used to praise the fourth caliph of Islam, who we claim to be the only caliph of Islam, namely Ali ibn Abu Talib, as we mentioned before. We call him Hazrat Ali. And we used to praise him in a way that only God was to be praised. For example, I heard several times in the mosque saying that is very popular within Iranian Shia Muslim circles, namely the saying that Ali, he isn't God, he's not God, but you can't separate him from God either. In Farsi, it would be Ali Khuda nist, amma az Khuda juda nist. Now that is utter shirk, it's blasphemy. You see, as a Muslim, I wanted all my devotions to be to God alone, something that is actually true of me today as well. Yet as a Shia Muslim, I was praising a mere creature. I was saying that Ali was so great that I can't separate him from Allah. You can't possibly reconcile such a statement with the Quran. For example, the Quran states in Surah Al-Ikhlas, Allahu Samad, Lam Yalad Walam Yulad Walam Yakul Lahu Kufuwan Ahad, which means that Allah is Ahad. He's the one and only. He's unique, and there is nothing like him. And yet I was claiming that you can't separate Ali from Allah, which is utter shirk. And if you actually have read the Ahadith, especially Sahih Bukhari, which I mentioned earlier, the Ahadith being the saying and deeds of the Prophet, you would understand that Ali himself would have actually burned these people alive for making such statements.
Wow.
So hence I was more or less, when I compared these sayings with the Quran, I understood that there was something wrong. And this was, of course, not the only way Shia Muslims worshipped Ali. Shia Muslims used to also pray to Ali. In fact, they pray more to Ali than they pray to Allah. Iranian Shia Muslims often say Ya Ali when they do something. The meaning of Ya Ali is help me, Ali. I mean, imagine the implications of such an utterance. In order for Ali to hear their prayers and help them, he has to be omnipresent and so powerful that he can answer prayers. In other words, he must be a deity. He must share in the attributes of Allah, which clearly violates the Quranic concept of monotheism, which is called Tawhid, more specifically Tawhid al-Asma wa Sifat, that Allah's attributes belong to him alone. Now, Shias would of course say that they are praying through Ali to Allah, that is, they are asking Ali to pray for them to Allah so that Allah helps them. But that doesn't solve the problem that Ali must be omnipresent in order to hear everyone. And it also contradicts the Quran, which states in Surah Al-Fatiha, which means that we worship only Allah, and only Allah we ask for help.
Okay, so you've made quite a compelling case already as to why Shia Islam has a lot of logical and incompatible flaws that do not hold further scrutiny. But that still leaves us with, if you wish, the original Quran, namely the Sunni Quran. Or why is that false in your view? And why did you personally leave that religion? Why didn't you just turn to become a Sunni Muslim?
Well, actually, that was precisely what was happening to me. I was starting to see the fact that Shia Islam contradicted the Quran, and And let me just say one other thing about Shia Islam, because I believe that it would be very important for the rest of our discussion, because it was a major thing that truly shaped me as a person. Let me just take this other factor as well, that made me very suspicious of Shia Islam. And it was their repeated claim that the Sahaba being the companions of the Prophet, that they were misguided. You see, let me explain this from a historical point of view. After Muhammad's death, Abu Bakr, Muhammad's close friend, and Aisha, Muhammad's wife, father, Abu Bakr was Aisha's father, he was appointed to be the first caliph. That is, Abu Bakr became Muhammad's successor. After Abu Bakr came Umar, and then Uthman, and last of the Rashidun was Ali ibn Abu Talib. Now, Shia say that Muhammad, after his last pilgrimage, which is called Hajjat al-Wada, declared that Ali was to be his successor at a pond called Khadir Rum. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that this occurred about some 3 months before Muhammad's death. Now, the Shia say that Muhammad got this instruction from Allah himself, and this is the real meaning of Surah 567. Now, this event, imagine what, if the Shias are right in this regard. This means that after the death of the Prophet, the Muslim decided to ignore, the Muslim community, the Sahaba, decided to ignore what Muhammad has said, and instead went against him by appointing Abu Bakr as the first Khalifa. This either means that Muhammad wasn't actually a true prophet because he was unsuccessful in making his closest followers follow the path that he had laid out before them, or that it means that the companions of Muhammad, his Sahaba, were either extremely ignorant or actually evil because they went against the clear commands of Muhammad. In the ultimate sense, it means that Allah failed to accomplish his will. Allah so wanted Ali to become the successor of Muhammad, but Allah failed miserably, since the Sahaba either chose to go against the commands of their prophet, or they were fools that had forgotten what Muhammad clearly had ordered. Not only that, the Sahaba were so close to Muhammad, and according to Muhammad, they were the best generation of Muslims, yet they failed miserably in doing Muhammad's will and following his path. These people risked their lives for Muhammad in wars and followed him everywhere, yet after his death, they more or less apostatized. Indeed, actually, many Shias would claim outright that many of the Sahaba are now in hell because they are kafirs.
Wow.
So if I was going to be a consistent Shia Muslim, this is where I want to go for this. If I was to be a consistent Shia Muslim, I had to actually believe that Muhammad was in this respect a failed prophet, and that Allah failed to uphold the Ummah as he wished. Instead, the overwhelming majority of Muslims deviated from the right path. They made up false hadiths about Muhammad that are today found in Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, and so on. So the entire religion of Islam became destroyed, and now only 10 to 15% of Muslims follow the correct path, which is laid out by the 12 Imams of Shia Islam. To believe in such conspiracies was to in fact deny the God that the Quran speaks about, a God that is capable of upholding his truths and defending it against falsehood. So I realized that Shia Islam is not true Islam. Now that caused me to think, if Islam, the Islam that I personally committed myself to, wasn't true, could the same be said of Islam as a whole? You see, once you've been proven wrong, that your particular branch is wrong, your mind opens to the possibility that the entire tree is wrong. In other words, when I came to the realization that Shia Islam is not true, I started asking myself whether Islam itself is true. Having opened up my mind to the possibility, I started viewing Islam in a different light, more skeptical, you might say. And this brought me to the conclusion that the entire religion is not true. And there are several reasons I left the religion of Islam. Now, to connect what happened between my experience of Shia Islam with me leaving Islam was also the fact that I had earlier studied Christianity, not that much, but I knew what Christianity was. And the same problem arose, namely, if Islam was to be true, then Isa, Jesus, had to be a complete failure, because Jesus, Sahaba, his followers preached that he was God manifested in flesh, that he was crucified for our sins, and he was resurrected after 3 days. Hence, the same problem arose, that if I were to accept Islam, Sunni Islam, I had to say that Jesus Sahaba, they were utter failures. They were evil people who deviated from the faith of Jesus and made up lies about Jesus. This same problem arose. Can you see the picture I'm painting here?
Yeah, in fact, I remember watching a theologian. I'm not sure who it was, who was confronted by a Muslim who's asking, "Why aren't you a Muslim?" And he says, "I am not a Muslim. I'm a Christian because the Quran proves that Islam is false. Namely, the Quran relies on the authenticity of the Bible, but the Bible would then, the teachings of the Bible and the New Testament would disagree, or in fact debunk the claims in the Quran. Therefore, Christianity is consistent, whereas the Quran isn't."
Yeah, definitely. Let me give you some Quranic verses that back up the claim you just made, and you can find it in especially Surah Al-Ma'idah, which is Surah 5 of the Quran, in ayahs of verses 47, 68, in Surah 29, ayah 46, Surah. There are many other surahs ayahs that speak about the gospel, the Injil, being the word of God, and that we could trust the Injil. Hence, of course, they do have that problem. For me, it had to do also with the character of God and who God is. You see, if Islam is true, that means that God Almighty completely failed in preserving the message of his earlier prophets, foremost Jesus, who Muslims called Isa ibn Maryam. Because if you read what the companions of Jesus wrote about him, it contradicts the Quran to 100%. As I said, the companions of Jesus claimed that he was crucified for our sins and resurrected, and the Quran denies this in Surah 4, Surah Al-Nisa, ayah 157. And it also, of course, claims that Jesus is only a mere creature. He's not a deity. He's not God himself, as the companions of Jesus claimed that he was. If you read, for example, Surah 4, 171 and Surah 5, 75. So if we are to believe that Islam is true, we must conclude that Allah utterly failed in preserving the message of Jesus. Because all the historical documents we have of Jesus contradicts the Quran. We must believe that Jesus' Sahaba were a bunch of ignorant lads that couldn't uphold the message of Jesus. Or even worse, they were evil and corrupted the message of Jesus. Simply put, we must say that Jesus, one of the Ulul Az, the 5 greatest prophets in Islam, was a big mistake from Allah's part, since his existence only caused confusion, and millions of people are going astray in believing falsehood because of Jesus. They are on their way to hell. And actually, Muslim apologists, they understand this problem. And in order to save the face of Islam, they have adopted all kinds of strange conspiracy theories. Just like the Shias had to make up conspiracy theories to get their wrong beliefs to match with reality, the Muslim apologists do the same. They claim that
the Bible has been corrupted, it's been changed and amended throughout history, and it was never initially claimed that Jesus was neither the Son of God nor a part of the Holy Trinity. These are their claims.
Yeah, and other claims, like, for example, Paul corrupted Christianity, and Jesus' Sahaba, the companions of Jesus, couldn't do anything to stop him. Or that Allah saved Jesus from being crucified. But both Jesus and Allah forgot to tell the people that Jesus was saved. So everybody started to think that Jesus died on the cross for our sins. and they have to make up lies like the Council of Nicaea destroyed the Bible, or the early church. People who were so committed to Jesus that they suffered persecution and died for him, that those people adopted pagan beliefs which they mixed with the historical Jesus, and so on. I mean, all of these conspiracy theories are built on the belief that Allah failed miserably with Jesus, and now we must somehow found out what actually happened. And it's very interesting. I find this extremely interesting, because in order to do so, the best Muslim apologists we find today have become great fans of atheists and their works. For example, Muslims love the works of Bart Ehrman. You know who Bart Ehrman is?
Yes, of course. He's the fantastic Christian or biblical historian who has written multiple books on the authenticity of the Bible and the texts, the Christian texts.
Precisely, and I agree with you. He's very knowledgeable, and his works are really good. And Muslims apologists, they love the works of Bart Ehrman. And the thing about Bart Ehrman is that he claims to be an agnostic. He's probably an atheist. And not only Bart Ehrman, but also other atheists. Muslims love their works. And now think about it. These are the same people that the Quran and Muhammad cursed and said they are enemies of Allah. These people are now the greatest heroes of Muslim apologists today. I mean, just look up what the Quran says about disbelievers. How Allah claims repeatedly in the Quran that these are the worst creatures in Allah's sight. Read Surah 8, Ayah 55. They are deaf, blind, dumb, and have no understanding if you read Surah 2, 171. And they will, of course, end up in hell, according to several ayahs in the Quran. Yet these, according to Allah, dumb, blind, and horrible creatures are the heroes of today's Muslim apologists. Muslim apologists read their works and present their material in order to make sense of why the message of Jesus is so different than that of Muhammad. But what are the Muslims apologists? What are they supposed to do if they don't do this? They have to use all means to propagate their highly unlikely conspiracy theories that Jesus was history's biggest failure, and Christianity was hijacked by Paul, and Allah was incapable of stopping him.
I mean, just in parenthesis, I want to mention this, that if anyone of our viewers are interested, my brother has a phenomenal debate with a Muslim apologist, which you can check out on YouTube. I'll see if I can provide a link to it below the video. And as a consequence of that that debate, where you, let's be frank, you demolish the poor guy, now Muslim apologists refuse to debate you. You can't get any Muslim apologists to debate you anymore because of that debate.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate, because I don't actually like to have monologues. I don't like to just present my material without anybody being able to reply to it. Since I don't like it when the Muslims do this. I see several famous Muslim apologists like Zakir Naik, for example, being probably the most popular Muslim apologist. And he just has lectures, and people can ask him questions, but not more than that. And I mean,
the recent clip of him when a ex-Muslim asks him about evolution.
Oh, right. I actually see that. That was really good. And that just goes to show that if a person knows what he's speaking about, Zakir Naik has to use all means to escape the situation. But anyway, I mean, he's not the only one. You have people like Joseph Estes and other people who just have lectures and don't give the other side the opportunity to reply. And I don't want to be like that. I want to have Muslims replying to what I'm saying in a, of course, respectful manner and in a debate forum. So
yeah,
I would like
maybe you'd like to take this opportunity. As you know, I've had interactions, and I've met with Hamzat Sources from Aira UK, and you are currently in Sweden, but you'll visit me shortly, and maybe we can arrange for you to have either a public conversation or a debate with Hamza. If you want to extend a challenge, or friendly challenge, I should say, to Hamza, and you're more than welcome to use this opportunity to do so.
Definitely, definitely. I would love to do that. I would love to do that. But would you like me to continue?
Yes. Let's get back on track.
Because,
So,
yeah, because
before we get, sorry,
yeah.
just one last thing. You mentioned the nature of God in Islam, and the fact that if it was true, God cannot be omnipotent because he fails. That nature of God in the Christian worldview versus the one in the Islamic worldview, there are more than just that particular difference, isn't it? There are other differences between the two natures of the two characters. Well, let's just name them as Allah and Yahweh. They are two extremely different characters, aren't they?
Oh, definitely. And the biggest difference probably being that Allah is just one person, while we Christians believe in a triune God. And the interesting thing is that the Quran doesn't seem to understand that fact. In fact, every single time the Quran speaks of the Trinity, it gets it wrong. If you read, for example, Surah Al-Ma'idah, that is Surah 5, Ayah 73 and Ayah 116 of the Quran, you would see that it misrepresents what we Christians believe about God. It tries to criticize our beliefs about the triune God, yet it gets it wrong. Instead of speaking about the Holy Spirit, it speaks about Mary being the third person of the Trinity, Mary, the mother of Jesus, of course. So yeah, there are absolute differences between, and this brings us actually back to what we spoke about earlier. Again, the Bible, in a consistent way, throughout its pages, speaks of God being triune. And if Islam is true, then that means that God utterly failed with preserving his earlier revelations, and all his prophets, the earlier prophets, got it wrong. And again, Jesus got it wrong. Jesus was a big failure, and his companions were just evil, deceptive people, and so forth. We're back on this same problem as we had earlier. So yeah, definitely there are major differences. But when I actually left Islam, I didn't really understand those differences. I knew that the Christians did believe in a triune God, but I didn't really understand what it was all about and so forth. It wasn't that interesting for me. I was more actually interested in what more is wrong with the religion of Islam. So that I more investigated Islam than I did Christianity. I didn't become a Christian until 4 years after leaving the Islamic faith.
Yeah, it wasn't that you substituted one religion for the other. It was, as you say, it was a very spiritual journey. So I really appreciate you informing me and our viewers of all of this. The purpose of my channel is not just to focus on the philosophical and theological aspects of this, but to have an actual impact in the reality of today, because I do believe that what me and what Majid Nawaz and Sam Harris and Douglas Murray and Haras Rafiq and Dave Rubin, who, by the way, just a quick shout out, Dave Rubin has got a channel here on YouTube called The Rubin Report. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's phenomenal. He's my inspiration for doing this, so a big shout out to Dave. But we separate, and this is a political separation. It's not a theological one. We separate between Muslims and Islamists. So let's clarify that separation. By Muslims, we call people who believe in Islam or most aspects of Islam or the essential tenets of Islam, Muslims, like our mother, like most of the 1.5 billion people. Islamists are whom we call the people who wish to enforce a certain interpretation of Islam upon society. And then obviously there's a additional subsection of that who are jihadists who wish to do so by use of force. Now, I'm going to pose a challenge to you here, and it's an interesting theological challenge, but it's also an interesting political challenge. And I'm going to bring up our good friend Reza Aslan, because Reza says that, hey, if you call yourself a Muslim, you're a Muslim. If you call yourself a Christian, you're a Christian. It doesn't matter what you believe, really. That all religious texts are just symbols and metaphors and so forth. And he uses the washing of the blood in the blood of the Lamb and so forth as an example, which is obviously a bad example because that is a metaphor. But you know, kill all infidels is not a metaphor. It's quite a prescription of action. So my challenge to you is, theologically speaking, who are the true Muslims in your mind? Who are they? The ones who follow every prescription within the Quran point by point? Are they the true Muslims?
Well, I recall when you presented me that you said that I'm a fundamentalist Christian. Yeah, I'm a fundamentalist Christian, and that is actually true. Since being a fundamentalist means that you derive your truths, your beliefs from Scripture, and that's what I do. And therefore, when I look at the Muslim world and people who draw their beliefs from Scripture, the Muslim Scriptures, that is the Quran, the Sunnah, I regard them as being true Muslims. And the Wahhabis, the Salafs, and so forth, they do this, while moderate Muslims, liberal Muslims, don't actually do this. Hence, therefore, I would probably say that the Salafis and the Wahhabis and so forth, they are more true Muslims than the liberals, and that goes with every religion, actually, including Christianity, where I say that the fundamentalist Protestant Christians are true Christians, while the liberal Christians aren't. So I would say that of all. But I mean, to say that the jihadists or the ISIS are true Muslims, that might be an exaggeration, because some of the things they do it because of what the Quran says, but other things don't actually line up exactly with what the Quran says. So, I mean, in certain aspects there are true Muslims, in other aspects not. That's a pretty complicated question.
Is it even possible to follow all the prescription? Because I recently had I refuse to call it a debate, I should say an interaction on Twitter, which is, by the way, the worst platform in the world to have an interaction on. But I had an interaction where the people who attacked me said that you can only be a real Muslim if you follow everything in the Quran, and if you don't, you are not a real Muslim. But you are very knowledgeable on the Quran. You know it pretty much by heart. Can you see it even be possible to follow everything in the Quran, or do you have to pick and choose?
You have to pick and choose, but not in an inconsistent way. Let me explain what I mean by that. The Quran has something whereby this concept of abrogation, and you can find in this Surah 2, Ayah 106, for example, that speaks of later verses abrogating earlier verses. So, for example, let me give you an example of this. That we find, for example, in Surah 2 of the Quran, verse 62, speaking about Christians who are good and do good works, they're going to get full reward from God. That is, they're going to enter paradise. Yet, if you go and read Surah 3, 85, you would read that only Muslims would enter paradise. In fact, if you read Surah 98, verse 6, it would speak about Christians being the worst creatures that exists. So how is it possible to reconcile this? How is it possible that God is going to give Christians who do good works paradise, but then no, God is only going to accept Muslims, and Christians are the worst creatures that exist? Well, many Muslims solve it through this concept of abrogation, that the verses about Christians being allowed to come into paradise are abrogated by later verses that speaks about Muslims being the only one that Allah would accept on Judgment Day.
And this concept of abrogation, it's just to clarify for our audience, we have the Medina verses and the Mecca verses. The Mecca verses come after Muhammad has seized political power.
No, it's the other way around. It's the other way around.
So the Medina...
During his time in Mecca, Muhammad was just a warner. If you read, for example, Surah 49, he describes himself only as a warner. So no, in Mecca, Muhammad was just a warner. But then when he came to Medina, he was not just only a warner. So Surah 22, verse 49 is not true anymore. He became a political leader and a warlord. So
exactly. So when he became a political leader, and he's had power, and he had a army, he was in a position to, shall we say, announce more malign and what we would probably interpret as evil or immoral verses. So like you say, and those verses that came in the Medina period, by abrogation you mean they cancelled out the previous peaceful verses?
Yeah, it's not just me, that the Muslim scholars are saying this. For example, Muhammad Mushin Khan, which is a famous Muslim scholar who has a very popular Quranic translation in English, which you can find on Quran.com. He's in his Quran, in the forewords, he speaks about this a lot and shows how several verses in the Quran have been abrogated. For example, if you read Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah 2, Ayah 256, it states that there should be no compulsion in religion, but he claims that verse, that ayah, has been abrogated by Surah 9, verse 5, which speaks about slaying the infidels.
That's a very popular verse that is brought up by the apologists, and by apologists I'm not referring to the Zaki Naik or Shabir Ali, but I'm more talking about the political apologists for Islam, the likes of Mehdi Hassan or Reza Aslan, who say, no, listen, Islam is very peaceful. Look at this verse right here. It says there is no compulsion in religion. You see how peaceful our religion is? But you are saying, or in fact, you are pointing and sourcing to Islamic scholars who say that verse was cancelled out, was abrogated by Muhammad himself.
Absolutely. And here's where now I mentioned Muhammad Mushin Khan, but never mind that. Here's the very important thing to understand. It is not the Muslims who should exegete the Quran. It is Muhammad, the person of Muhammad. We see in the Quran several times Allah commanding the Muslims to be like Muhammad, to imitate Muhammad. For example, in Surah 33, Ayah 21, and Surah 4, Ayah 80. Let me just, my batteries are low, but I can fix this later. Anyway, Allah is commanding Muslims to imitate Muhammad. So it is Muhammad that is the living Quran. You have to go back to Muhammad to see how you should interpret the Quran and how you should behave and what kind of lifestyle you should have. And there are actually good things to say about Muhammad, but there are also very horrendous facts about him that made it, for me personally, impossible to view him as the role model for all humanity. Because that's the way that
this is an excellent point, and one which I was hoping we'd lead into shortly, namely the nature of morality within the Quran. Do you wanna go and fix your batteries while I'll have a brief monologue?
bring my charger. It would just take a second.
Okay, so I'm hoping that you'll enjoy the debates so far, or the conversation, I should say, with Omid P, and hopefully it has been a rewarding time where you can see the inconsistencies within the theology of Islam. And now I'm hoping to move the conversation forward to the morality, because in Islam it is clearly, in my mind, stated that Muhammad is the perfect moral role model, and all Muslims should follow his examples. Now, I was berated on Twitter, Omid, when I tweeted out that Muhammad was a pedophile for marrying Aisha when she was 6 years old and then consummating that marriage when she was 9 years old. That is the definition of pedophilia. And I got two types of responses from Muslims on Twitter, both of which I don't think hold scrutiny. The first one was that, hey, this was the norm of the time. This was widespread. Everyone did it. But that is a moral relativism, because fair enough, if it was the norm of the time, it was the norm of the time. A, it doesn't make it right, but B, and more importantly, it shows that Muhammad is not the perfect moral being, because he was subject to the morality that was prevalent at his time. The second argument people said, and this is where I want you to maybe comment on, they said, a lot of Muslims said that no, this, and one of them is Mohammed Shafiq, who is quite a prominent apologist for Islam here in the UK. They said that it's not true. Muhammad didn't do that. These are all falsities. But you claim that this is one of the best established facts about Muhammad with multiple independent sources. Can you please expand on that a bit?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you can't deny this. If it was possible to deny it, every single Muslim apologist would have denied it. You can't deny it. There are so many hadiths, not only in the Sahih hadiths, but other hadiths as well, that speaks about Aisha being that young. But there are several hadiths in the most authoritative hadith collection within Sunni Islam, Sahih al-Bukhari. For example, I believe it is volume 7, book 62 of Sahih Bukhari, hadith number 18 and 88, that speaks about Muhammad coming to Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr actually being reluctant to give Aisha to Muhammad, but Muhammad insisted upon having her. And in Sahih Muslim, I don't remember the exact reference there, but it states that Aisha, she was so young that she brought her dolls when Muhammad came for her. I believe it is stated in Hadith 3309 and 3311 in book 8 of Sahih Muslim, that Aisha was so young she brought her dolls with her when Muhammad came for her. I mean, the fact that many of these hadiths are actually narrated by Aisha herself, where she clearly states that she was 6 years old when she married and 9 years old when they consummated marriage. So there is absolutely no dispute about this within actual scholarly circles. And of course, Muslims today, they're embarrassed by it, so they make up these lies. But Muslim apologists, the overwhelming majority of Muslims apologists agree that she was indeed 6 years old and he was 51 years old when they got married. And you could ask the question, why would a 50-plus-year-old man want such a young girl? And I mean, why? Why marry such a young girl? The answer can only be sex. I mean, he didn't marry her to like share his life, his emotions, his struggles with her. No, he married her.
That would be arguably very wrong today. So yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And this obviously brings us to the whole notion of Muhammad as the perfect moral being that is the example for all Muslims to follow. Now, you and I, we have certain disagreements about the ontology, not so much perhaps about the epistemology, but about a lot about the ontology of morality. But we have common agreement, common grounds on most of the bigger questions. You should not kill other people for their views. You shouldn't, you know, I don't know, kill homosexuals. These things we agree with. But Muhammad deviates a lot from what we today call conventional wisdom in terms of morality. Yet, this is the perfect example for Muslims to follow. If, let's say, a thought experiment here, if Islam was true, and we should all follow Muhammad, what would the world be like if it was really true? What would morality be like? I know it's a big question, but maybe you can break it down a bit in terms of these are the things we should be doing if that was true.
Well, first of all, if you go back to his marriage with Aisha, I mean, you and I, we can never go to countries like Afghanistan or Bangladesh or Pakistan, where many girls are married to older men, and criticize what they are doing because, well, God put his stamp of approval. If you try to tell a 50-year-old Muslim man that he's wrong in marrying and having sex with a 10-year-old girl, he would reply, "How dare you question the moral standards of Allah? You're condemning the Prophet of Allah because he did the same thing." You can't criticize these kind of things anymore because they have put their stamp of approval. This is divine morality. And let me just say something about that, and then we can move on. The Quran actually has a verse which speaks about where I mean, it clearly allows men to have sex with girls so young that they haven't reached puberty. And you can find this in Surah 65, Ayah 4 of the Quran. So I mean, it's in the Quran as well. But other things, I mean, everyone who would leave Islam would, I mean, every single apostate would have to be killed, according to Surah 4, Ayah 89 of the Quran. And also, if you read several hadiths in Sahih al-Bukhari, for example, volume 9, book 83, and number 17, speaks about Muhammad saying that everyone who leaves Islam, kill that person. You mentioned homosexuals, they have to be killed. Thieves, if they steal something, their hands have to be cut off. I mean, women who commit adultery have to be stoned to death. I mean, there are so many of these laws, not to mention other laws regarding women. The fact that, for example, polygamy would be accepted because according to Surah 4, verse 3 of the Quran, men have the right to have up to 4 wives.
Men have the right, but women do not have the same right, obviously.
No, of course not. Of course not.
Now, just to foreburn something here, I know that some of our viewers, and especially this being me, and maybe I have a few followers who may be viewing this, will look at you and say, wait a minute, this is a Christian fundamentalist saying that homosexuals would be killed. Well, that's the same in Christianity. But you and I have had extensive conversations about Christianity, and this is not the topic of this video. We're not going to go into that, but I want us to acknowledge the fact that that is not what a fundamentalist Christian believes, that we should be killing we should be killing homosexuals, and most of the Leviticus and Deuteronomy texts that a lot of atheists bring up, and I'm an atheist myself, are again maybe not abrogated, but they were very time and region specific to one certain people in the true belief of Christianity. These were not commandments that were meant to apply to everyone for all time. Is that a fair description?
Oh, definitely. If you read the Old Testament, Jeremiah 33 and Ezekiel chapter 36, for example, he speaks about the covenant that is in the Old Testament not being eternal but temporary. When the Messiah comes, the Messiah said that my kingdom is not of this world. In John chapter 18, verse 36, for example, render to Caesar what is Caesar, render to God what is God, and so forth. He simply distinguished between our religious beliefs and politics, so that the two are separate. But I would actually love to maybe someday have a discussion regarding that. So I won't. I'm not one of those Christians that criticize one belief for having immoral contents and not letting them engage me.
Yeah,
So
no,
I
I
should
appreciate
definitely
that,
be
and
able to
maybe
have
that's
such a
something that we
discussion.
could arrange some for another time. But I don't want to deviate from the topic of this video today, which is Islam. I think you've made a very strong case from a theological point of view why Islam doesn't hold water, why there are a lot of inconsistencies within the theological aspects of Islam. But I know also that from a historical point of view, there are a lot of questions to be raised. Is that correct?
What exactly do you mean from a historical point of view?
For example, I mean, obviously my memory is much worse than yours, especially as this is not my field of expertise in any sense. But there are mentions in the Quran about journeys that Muhammad took, or places he visited that did not exist or at the time, and things like that that cannot are plainly historically wrong, and geographically maybe even.
Oh yeah, definitely. And there actually just recently there has been much work done in this subject. I don't know if you know Tom Holland, the scholar.
Yeah, of course, he's brilliant.
I mean, he's written the book. What's the name of the book? Under the Shadow of the Sword or something like that, where he speaks about the history of the Quran and Islam, and it's very interesting. It's become, but this is very new material, and it's people are looking it up. But there are, as you just said, for example, you said that Muhammad, he made this night journey, right, which is written about in Surah 17 of the Quran, where he speaks about he traveling to the mosque in Jerusalem. Now the problem with that is, of course, that during Muhammad's lifetime there was no mosque in Jerusalem. There wasn't even a temple there. The temple was destroyed year 70. So you could ask the question, what did actually Muhammad go to? So in that respect, yeah, the Quran does have a historical error there. Many claim that the mosque that Surah 17 is speaking about is not the mosque in Jerusalem. But actually, if you read Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 4, book 55, and hadith 636, it clearly says that it is the mosque in Jerusalem that Muhammad visited. But there was no mosque over there, not even a temple. So during Muhammad's time, so that would be a historical error, one of the many historical errors that the Quran contains. Definitely.
And so we touched upon one historical error. We touched upon a lot of theological aspects. We've talked about the morality and how, if it was true, especially the Eurocentric view of morality, and also maybe the Western view of morality, whereas I would call it the universal view of morality, is actually completely false, and we should all change our ways. So we've discussed and touched upon these aspects. What other aspects do you think speaks for the falsity of Islam as a religion? Maybe independent to the Christian view, because I know that for you as a Christian, obviously there is a lot more that speaks to the falsity of Islam, but well, not objectively speaking, but maybe generally speaking, impartially speaking, for Christian or non-theist or so forth.
Yeah, okay, sure. There are two main areas, I would say. The one would be the status of women, which we touched upon, and the other would be scientific errors in the Quran. Let me say something about the status of women. You see, when I was a Shia Muslim, I was told that there is something known as muta. Do you know what muta is?
No.
Hello?
No, I don't. I don't.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Muta is temporal marriage. In other words, a man and a woman come together. Some guy recites some verses from the Quran, and they are allowed to have sexual intercourse for a certain period of time. Now, this, of course, is prostitution within a religious context, not to mention adultery. I found this very appalling. But then I realized that Sunnis don't actually believe in Mutta. In fact, this is a major point of disagreement between Shias and Sunnis. So I went to see where this belief came from. And something that even Sunnis accept is that this practice was indeed allowed by the Prophet Muhammad, and traces of this can be found still in the Quran. You found both in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim hadith speaking about the companions of Muhammad benefiting from mutta, this temporal marriage, especially in the times of war, and allowing this practice. Now, here's the thing. One interesting verse in the Quran that I was told speaks of mutta is found in Surah Al-Nisa, Surah 4, Ayah 24. You know what? Allow me to read it. I'm going to just open my web browser. Go to
I just mentioned that the book from Tom Holland is In the Shadow of the Sword that he brought up. And let's just say that having followed Tom Holland for a period of time, I know he has received some academical criticism, but the backlash from Muslims who are non-scholars, the likes of that fraud and charlatan Mo Ansar, and many others have been far worse. But it's certainly an interesting work of fiction, work of history, not fiction. But it's not one that is unanimously agreed upon. Like no book in this subjects will ever be unanimously agreed upon. But that's the name of the book anyway. Please do check it out.
Now, and continuing with this theme I was speaking about, I'm reading from Quran.com, the Sahih International version of the Quran. And Surah 4, Ayah 24 of the Quran says, "And also prohibit to you are all married women except those your right hand possesses." Now let me repeat this. "And also prohibited to you are all married women except those your right hand possesses." Now, just think about it. Did you notice what the first part of this verse said? It clearly said that married women are unlawful for Muslims to have sex with, except what? Except married women that your right hand possesses. Let me repeat that. At face value, the Quran clearly allows men to have sexual intercourse with women that are married to other men, as long as their right hand possesses those women. What does the term right hand possesses mean? Well, if you look up the term in the Quran, you see that it refers to slave girls and girls that are captured in war. In other words, booty. And the Quran clearly allows men to have sexual intercourse with these slave girls or these war booties, as I mentioned in Surah 4:24. But there are also other surahs as well. If you look up, for example, Surah 23, Ayah 1 to 6, and Surah 70, Ayah 29 to 30. The interesting thing I found was that Surah 4:24 says that sex with these women is halal, even if they are married to other men. The Quran or Allah is clearly advocating adultery here. Thinking that I might have misunderstood this passage, I looked up when this verse was revealed. I looked up the Azal al-Nuzul, that is the circumstances behind the revelation. And according to both Sahih Muslim, Hadith 34-33 in Book 8, and Sunan Abu Dawud, which is the third most trusted Hadith collection, This verse of the Quran was revealed after the Battle of Hunain, in which some Muslims had captured female captives and wondered if they could have sex with these women even though their husbands were still alive. And Muhammad permitted it by revealing this verse. Now obviously, these women didn't want to have sex with the Muslim warriors, and they were married to other men, but Allah allowed it to happen. And this isn't just one-time event. The Muslim sources are filled with narratives of Muslims having sex with female captives. Two of Muhammad's own wives were captives from war, Safiya bint Huay and Jurayra bint Harith. The second one is the most interesting, since according to the Muslim sources, the Muslims had just killed her husband, Jurayra's husband, Mustafa bin Safwan, and her father. I mean, I can't imagine a woman wanting to have sex with a man that had just recently caused the death of her loved ones. Yet that is precisely what we find in the most authoritative Muslim sources. And hence, I mean, just this very thing, when I came to see this verse, I can't even imagine that this verse was revealed by God himself. The fact that the Quran and Muhammad's Sunnah just gives permission for, captive women and slave girls to be used in this way, even if they're very young and married to other people. I mean, this is perfectly in line with the Quran's overall description of women as objects for sexual pleasure as well. Yeah. So the last statement I just made might have been some exaggerated. I must admit the Quran does speak of women in many ways, but there is a theme in the Quran and the Sunnah that women are inferior, and they are many times portrayed as objects for sexual pleasure. For example, if you look at the Islamic concept of paradise, it is a sex harem. According to many ayahs of the Quran, Muslims men are going to enjoy beautiful virgins in paradise. Just look up Surah 37, verse 40 to 48, Surah 52, ayah 20, Surah 78, ayah 33. I mean, it feels like Allah is trying to bribe Muslim men to obey him by appealing to their depraved sexuality. This view of women, to view women as at least some women as sexual objects only for pleasure and being condoned by Allah, I mean, this is something that I couldn't possibly accept. It just creates obnoxious feelings within me. No, but this is what Islam does. It robs women of dignity and respect by presenting them as inferior to men. So this was a very big issue for me, the status of women. And as I mentioned before, Surah 4 verse 3 allows men to have up to 4 wives. I mean, just think about it. That some women have to tolerate their husbands having sex with another woman in the home she works and lives in. Can you see how this destroys the love between a man and a woman and humiliates the woman? In fact, it doesn't stop there. As I said before, the Quran allows men to have sex with female captives and slave girls beside their wives. And there are many ayahs about this. Read Surah 23 verse 6, Surah 70 verse 30. And if that wasn't enough, the husband has even the right to beat his wife to submission, according to Surah 4, ayah 34 of the Quran. Now, this ayah, it seems to present beating your wife as the last resort. And scholars say that it should be done in such a way that the woman is not bruised. Frankly, I don't care. The very fact that men have the right to beat their wives shows that the Quran considers women to be intellectually and morally inferior, and therefore men should have the right to hit them in order to discipline them. Yeah. And this is something that I saw many times with Muhammad when I read about Muhammad's life and read Sahih Bukhari and so forth, that Muhammad considered women to be ungrateful, less intelligent than men, and that the majority of people in the hell are women. So I mean, the status of women, I couldn't imagine, because it's not in line with the morality that I know is true, and the concept of God as being loving and fair. And it's not even true. Women are not. I work as a science teacher. That's my job. I am a science teacher. I teach science and math. And I know that my female students actually perform oftentimes better than the male students. So, yeah. So it's not even true.
No, of course, it's not true. But this is what Sam Harris talks a lot about, where when he says ideas have consequences. And you can look at that ludicrous video with Reza Aslan. I think it's on CNN. It may be MSNBC, but he says that, well, in some Islamic countries, women are not equal, but in Malaysia they certainly are, in Indonesia they certainly are, in Turkey they certainly are, and he points to the fact that Turkey has had female prime ministers or something. I'm not sure, I don't recall exactly, but that is a sort of a sleight of hand trick that he's using there, because the ideas that women are inferior to men stems from a holy or so-called holy texts, and in those instances where this is not applied, it's not because of Islam, it's despite of the Quran.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. I've seen
that. You also mentioned this earlier, and we should also, you mentioned it as well, that you are a science teacher, and by the way, even though he's a Christian fundamentalist, he's not a young earth creationist. We should mention that as well. But you mentioned that there are scientific inaccuracies in the Quran as well that are incompatible to what we know. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, the world's most famous Muslim apologist, Zakir Naik, recently there was a video release of him where he discusses the theory of evolution, and it is preposterous. His reply has had me laughing of how preposterous his reply was. He mentioned that it is only a theory, and then he holds his hands like this. I love it. And he says that a theory means nothing in science. So maybe you can expand a bit on the scientific inaccuracies in the Quran and how they cannot be compatible to what we know.
Yeah, definitely, because this was an area which I was very interested in, especially one of the reasons that I thought the Quran was divinely inspired was because I couldn't just imagine an Arabian man living 1,400 years ago that he could possibly know the scientific things that are written in the Quran. And I was very interested in science in those days, which I still am. I am a science teacher. So I started to look these verses up, and I was much interested in the works of Harun Yahya. He's not that famous, Harun Yahya. Many Muslims actually don't even like him. But he was one who promoted this view a lot. And I had these documentaries which supposedly disproved evolution and proved the Quran to be scientifically accurate. And I also listened to some Zakir Naik's lectures about the science in the Quran. But when I later came to doubt Islam and started to investigate the scientific statements found in the Quran from an objective point of view, I was just disgusted with myself, to be honest. I couldn't believe someone that was studying math, physics, and biology in the university, could actually fall victim of this clear eisegesis that people like Zakir Naik and Yahya were doing, in forcing the Quranic ayahs to conform to modern scientific knowledge. Let me give you an example, probably the most famous example of scientific miracles found in the Quran, namely the development of the human embryo as described in Surah 23, 12 to 14. Let me bring that up as well, how the Quran describes the development of the human embryo. Just 1 second, and I will just bring it up here. From Quran.
No, while you do that, obviously this is all quite impromptu. We're just having a conversation. We did not plan this beforehand, so we're just going with the flow. That's why not everything is in place. So that's absolutely fine. Take your time. Let me know when it's done.
Yeah, I got the verse here. Okay. And it says the following: Surah 23, ayah 12 to 14. This is like portrayed as the greatest scientific miracle in the Quran, and it says the following. And you and I can read this from an objective point of view. Muslims often just force scientific knowledge here, but let's just read it objectively. It says the following: and certainly did we create man from an extract of clay, Then we placed him as a sperm drop in a firm lodging. Then we made the sperm drop into a clinging clot, and we made the clot into a lump of flesh, and we made from the lump bones, and we covered the bones with flesh. Then we developed him into another creature. So blessed is Allah, the best of creators. Now, you and I, as I said, we just read this from a very objective point of view. If we were to actually try to take what these ayahs say at face value without eisegesis of Muslim scholars, there seems to be no scientific miracle here at all. No. First of all, it says that man is made from clay and that Allah placed him as a sperm drop in a room, and the sperm drop became a clot. Never mind the clay part. Do you see that there is no mention whatsoever of the female egg? And for obvious reasons. People of Muhammad's time only saw the sperm, and they thought that it was the sperm that created the child. Secondly, the verse clearly says that the flesh, that is the muscles, are made after the bones. This too is so clearly wrong, since they are made simultaneously. There is absolutely nothing amazing with these ayahs, and every Muslim that decides to actually read these ayahs at face value and compare it with modern science would see this. An interesting note here. In your city of London, there is a Muslim apologist. You mentioned him in the beginning, Hamza Sources. That's how you pronounce his last name, right? Yeah. He used to champion the argument that the Quran contains scientific miracle, and he used this precise argument about the human embryo in many debates. Yet, quite recently, he has come out with a video in which he says that Muslims shouldn't use these kinds of arguments anymore, and it seems as if though he himself has regretted doing so. I think, and this is just...
that is to his credit. I mean, he even wrote a long blog post about the embarrassment of scientific claims by Muslim apologists. And hey, credit to him for doing that.
Yeah, definitely. But you see, if someone actually looks at the scientific statements made by the Quran, it is obvious. I mean, it is absolutely obvious that the Quran is filled with scientific errors. Let me give you some other scientific errors found in the Quran, just a few. In Surah 18, ayah 83 to 90 of the Quran, it states that the sun goes down in a pool of murky water. That is precisely what is written over there. And Dhul Qarnayn sees this actually happening. Now, of course, Muslims try through eisegesis in desperate ways to go away from the clear meaning of that text. But if you read it at face value, objectively, it says the sun goes down in a pool of murky water. In Surah 67, verse 5, and 37, verse 6 to 8, we read that that shooting stars are actually missiles that Allah uses to keep jinns, that is demons, away from hearing what is said in heaven. Just imagine physical objects destroying spiritual objects. I mean, it doesn't make really sense. Anybody reading these verses in an objective way would clearly see that these are scientific errors.
Yeah.
There are, of course, more, but I mean, just goes to show you. I mean, I was disgusted with myself that I fall victim of these so-called scientific miracles in the Quran, and yeah. But I would like to say to all, if any Muslims are listening to this, I personally hope that I have not offended anybody. I mean, I regard Muslims as my friends, and the overall majority of Muslims are actually very friendly and peace-loving people. I would like to say I've actually been there. I've tried to force a false belief to correspond to reality through eisegesis and conspiracy theories and inconsistent arguments. But I would like to just tell them, please just let go and look at the facts in an objective manner. Because this was what I came to do later in my life. After leaving Islam, I had a period about 4 years when I didn't actually believe in any religion. But because of certain events in my life,
Hey, if you want to promote
yeah,
your religion, you're more than welcome to do so. You've given me a lot of your time. I appreciate it. I know how busy you are back there in Stockholm. So,
all right, so let me at least be able to end with this. That there came a period in my life where I suffered from much depression and anxiety and so forth, and I started to look for a reason to live. This search came actually after a period in my life where I went every week out to nightclubs. I drank, tried to pick up girls, and played mostly computer games and so on. Yet despite the fact that I tried to run away from the reality of my depression, it still haunted me and I couldn't get rid of it. So I started to search for answers for what was happening in my life, since I considered it to be so unfair that I, who considered myself to be a good person, should be the subject of so much suffering and anxiety that I went through. So I actually started reading the Quran again and just asked God if he exists, that he would help me. But the pages of the Quran contain nothing that helped me. It was the same old incomprehensible message that no one really understands without knowing the background behind the revelation. So I actually started to read the Bible, and something started to happen. God started to speak to me, not in an audible sense, but through the pages of the Bible. For example, I remember once I just couldn't stop reading about the Exodus. While I was reading, I was asking myself, why am I reading this? And yet couldn't stop. It was like a force that was keeping me from leaving the text. Afterwards, I understood that God was answering my prayers. I was asking why all of this was happening to me. And God made me read the Exodus because he was telling me that he's bringing me out of the bondage of sin, idolatry, and selfishness through the harsh desert into his kingdom. So I started to pray to God, this time the God that was described in the Bible, and I received many answers to my prayers, wonderful answers that actually caused me to be shocked at the fact that there actually is a God. But at the same time, I started having this very frightening dream. I started dreaming that God took me and started drowning me in a sea. And the dream was so real that I had to wake up just in order to breathe. Anyway, I continued reading the Bible and I started to understand more of what was actually going on. I wasn't a good person. I wasn't the good person that I thought I was. I was someone who still lived life in a very selfish way. I was proud, indifferent, lustful, and so on. God didn't actually owe me a good life. In fact, I understood that I stood condemned under his justice. At the same time, I also read the gospel, the good news that the King of God's kingdom had come and opened the way with his blood for everyone that truly wants God to be in fellowship with God. I understood that I can be forgiven and have a wonderful, loving relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Therefore, one February night, now 6 years ago, I decided that I no longer could live in rebellion against my Maker, now that he has shown me that he exists and opened the way for me to be with him. That night I prayed a prayer saying, God, it doesn't matter what happens to me, I would always be yours. And then I had this dream again that God took me and started drowning me in a sea. But this time I allowed God to do this since I had given myself to him. And God took me deeper and deeper into the sea, and it became darker and darker until I came out the other side. And it was a beautiful sky with birds in the air and the sun shining. And I heard God speaking to me, telling me, I want you to be born again. When I woke up, all my depression and anxiety had disappeared. God had healed me. But more than that, he had given me his Holy Spirit, because after that event, I couldn't stop reading the Bible, and I started to understand the message of the Bible in a way I never understood before. And ever since then, I can't do anything else than to live my life for my Lord and Savior and the love of my life, my King Jesus Christ, who loved me and gave his life to me. And that's how I personally became a Christian and am engaging and trying to engage Muslims to show them the beauty of Jesus Christ. So my foremost purpose is in no way to just humiliate Muslims or tell them that they are wrong and so forth, or they are stupid in any way. Absolutely not. My foremost purpose in engaging Muslims, in actually showing them the beauty of Jesus Christ, that they could, through him, have a loving relationship with God for all eternity. So that's why I'm doing this. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do this as well, Amir.
No, it's my pleasure, and thank you for your time. I know how busy you are and how hard it is to pin you down, so I appreciate everything. Obviously, you and I have different worldviews. I'm an atheist, you're a Christian, and you're very sincere, as are many Muslims, in their beliefs. And like you say, we can agree on this, that this is not an attack on Muslims in any way, shape, or form. This is questioning ideas and ideologies. And my purpose with this is a lot to do with what Sam Harris says, that ideas have consequences. And I do believe that a belief in Islam, a certain belief in Islam, not all beliefs, because as you said, most Muslims that we know, including our mother, they're very peaceful, kind, generous, fine people, much better than myself in many instances. So this is not an attack on every person's belief, because obviously a lot of people adapt those beliefs and having compatible with very moral views on every subject under the sun. So this is not that. This is a question period of ideologies. And I think you've done a phenomenal job, and I'm very grateful in exposing the inconsistencies within the ideologies. And if that can grow a seed of doubt into people who may be straying towards a more regressive ideology of Islam, then we've done our job. Obviously, you have higher ambitions. You wish for them to turn to Christ. But my main purpose with this entire channel on Safe Space is not that. My main is to question these aspects that cause a lot of suffering in the world today. One of them is a certain belief in Islam as infallible. And I hope that we've together, mostly you, demonstrated that there is a lot of at least questions to be asked about Islam as an ideology. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Amir, for having me, and thank you so much. Good luck with everything you do, and I hope that I see you soon when you somehow manage to speak to Hamza's sources or someone else. And
I know that the only reason you want to see me is because of my brother, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Lots of love, brother. I love you, and I'll see you soon.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.